So we've got some feedback relating to our character spawning through that particle effect system we made, but we want to add a little bit of information for our player before the particle system goes off that tells the player that the characters are about to spawn. So to do that, we need to create a world space canvas that will be on top of our spawner here, but we're actually going to take a shortcut to do that. And there's no shame in using shortcuts. In fact, I recommend using them wherever possible because it will make your life 100 times easier. So the shortcut we're going to use here is to go inside one of our enemies. For the sake of example, I use the spider. And what we want to do is duplicate the spider's canvas. So to do that, we can say, we will on our keyboard, we'll hit Control or Control on Windows or Command on Mac, Control plus D. So you press those two characters at the same time, and we'll get this second canvas right on top of the first. What we then need to do is grab our canvas and drop it under our spawner game object. Then, once we have it here, we'll go into our rect transform and set our positions X, Y, and Z to 0. And what that'll do is center our canvas on our spawner. Now, we don't want the number here because our spawner only takes 1 second and decimals can be kind of ugly to look at. So what we want to do is open our canvas and just delete the text object. Then we want to open up our slider object here, and we're just going to change the colors so it's clear to our player that this isn't a health bar for an enemy, but is in fact a timer. So we're going to select our background, and we're going to change that color to white, and then we're going to select our fill area, open it up, grab the fill, and set that color to blue. That way it's completely visually distinct from the health bars on our enemies. Next, what we want to do is go into the slider game object, and remember we set this max value for our enemies to 100 because the enemies have 100 health. We only want to use 1 because we're only dealing with 1 second here. Now what we can do is go ahead and open up our spawner script. And we need to do a couple things in here to make this timer thing work. First, we need to go to the top after we typed unityengine.ai and hit enter a couple times. And we'll say using unityengine.ui this time instead of AI. And that'll give us access to our UI classes. Now we'll go down and we'll say public slider, and we'll name that all lowercase slider. And we're going to set this slider to a value of our child component slider. So we'll say get component in children slider. And that's going to assign that slider we just made to this value. Now what we need to do is adjust a little bit of our code here. So we need to add a new integer value. It's going to say public int spawn time. And we're going to set that equal to 1. Now, the reason that we're doing this is we need a value that we can assign to our slider that will move it down as the timer goes down. So now that we have this, what we'll do is we'll drop into our if statement that we made earlier. And what we're going to say here is that if we're spawning an object, and we want this to spawn when our spawn delay is equal, or I'm sorry, our spawn time is equal to 0. So in our update here, what we're going to say is outside of our conditional, we're just going to say spawn time is equal to spawn time minus time.delta time. And what that's going to do is make sure that our spawn time value is always decremented or decreased on every frame. And now you'll notice we get this red line. And this is actually a mistake on my part, but it's a good teaching moment. What we'll say here is this red line is happening because time.delta time, if you highlight it in that little box there, it says it's a float. And we made our spawn time an integer. And the problem is we can't just we can't subtract a float from an integer, and it won't turn itself into one unless we make it a float. So we're going to go back up to the top and change our public int spawn time into a public float spawn time. And then one thing we also need to do is after the 1, just hit the F key. That F just tells our code that we want this 1 to be a float and not an integer. And now if we scroll down, we'll see that this is now set accordingly. What we can then do is say our slider dot value is equal to spawn time. And this will keep us from, or this will automatically update our slider to be the right value. Now, you might notice if this is subtracted constantly, we're going to end up with a huge negative number. So what we're going to do inside of our if conditional here is say spawn time is equal to 1. And what that's going to do is just reset our timer every time that we spawn something, and then it will decrease as we go along, waiting for our spawn delay. And then go ahead and Control S or save the project however you need to, and go ahead and test it out.